If you're HIV negative and reading this, I urge you to examine your beliefs and educate yourself about what it means to be positive, says Mykki Blanco, an American poet and musician living with HIV. When the virus first emerged in the 1980s, it invariably led to AIDS and death. Thankfully, that's no longer the case, and life expectancy for those receiving treatment is near normal, but until a cure is found, the battle isn't won. Vogue speaks to 5 creative forces who are using their voice and personal experiences to end the stigma surrounding the ongoing pandemic. Once a year, in the run-up to World AIDS Day on December 1st, we wear a red ribbon as the universal symbol of awareness and support for people living with HIV. But why, when some 38 million people are living today with HIV, with an estimated 1.7 million individuals becoming newly infected every year, aren't we having a more consistent dialogue around HIV/AIDS issues? Visual AIDS, the organization who initiated the Ribbon Project in 1991, today known as the Red Ribbon, disseminates and supports the work of HIV-positive artists, both established and emerging, through exhibitions, events and publications to raise awareness about the ongoing pandemic. Founded in 1988, in tandem with the World Health Organization declaring the inaugural World AIDS Day, Visual AIDS was one of the first initiatives to record the impact of AIDS on the artistic community. By the end of that year, it had claimed almost 62,000 lives in the US alone since 1981. Now, thanks to antiretroviral therapy, ART, the daily use of a combination of HIV medicines, the life expectancy of someone with HIV is close to that of someone without the virus, for those who have access to the treatment. What's more, if they maintain an undetectable viral load, when the virus exists in such small quantities that it can't be detected in the blood, in the US, that's below 50 copies per milliliter of blood, they cannot transmit HIV sexually. In some cases, it's possible to prevent transmission of HIV from a mother to her unborn child. Society, however, has some serious catching up to do with modern medicine. HIV/AIDS continues to hold a deep stigma. In September, former Welsh rugby captain Gareth Thomas was blackmailed by a tabloid into revealing publicly that he is HIV positive with undetectable, untransmittable status. People with HIV are misrepresented as walking around with walking sticks who are close to dying, said Thomas in a BBC video. I want to break the stigma. A few days later, Queer Eye star Jonathan Van Ness wrote in his memoir, Over the Top, about being HIV positive. The Trump administration has done everything they can do to have the stigmatization of the LGBT community thrive around me, he told the New York Times of his reasons for coming out. They aren't alone in speaking publicly about their personal experiences to end the stigma surrounding HIV. Vogue talks to 5 creative forces who are using their voice to call for a more progressive society and a cure, now. The 27-year-old Taipei-based photographer is a graduate of Xixin University and works as an artist, curator and photographer. Since 2017, Kyron Liu has been developing humans as hosts, a project in collaboration with social networks, NGOs, and public health authorities around the world consisting of portraits and interviews with people living with HIV. I want people to know what we feel in our everyday lives and how we stay alive with the virus and stigma, he says. This is the first time he has spoken publicly about his own positive status. In 2015, aged 23, I did a year of alternative service. Taiwan has maintained a policy of mandatory conscription for all men since 1951, as a photographer and assistant at the National Taiwan Museum of Fine Art. During this time I met a guy. I asked about his status after we finally slept together. I knew I could take PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis, a treatment that can stop an HIV infection if taken within 72 hours of exposure, but he assured me I needn't worry. 2 weeks later I got a fever. I went to see a doctor and they diagnosed me with HIV. I was so upset. I tried to contact the guy, but he blocked my number and on every app. Being gay, deep inside I always knew there was a risk, but I always considered myself to be well behaved. I don't sleep around or do drugs, but anyone can get HIV. It became clear I had my own prejudices to confront. Before 2015, my work was more about observing religion and contemporary beliefs, but since my diagnosis I've become more spiritual. My friend, the subject of many of my photographs, has the alias tree, because when I was sick, I saw myself as a tree trunk being cut off. Nothing was left but the roots, but as I got better the leaves and branches grew back. In 2017, I did a residency at Pier 2 Art Center in Kaohsiung, the south of Taiwan, where I got the idea for humans as hosts, and so began my journey as a visual artist living with HIV. HIV/AIDS activism in Taiwan is geared more towards an individual's physical health rather than creating a dialogue about the individual's mental status, making it quite isolating. Through research, I came across visual aids, which led me to Residency Unlimited in New York in 2018. I never thought I would become a full-time artist or even the curator, but my experiences have made me who I am now. Every day, people living with HIV take medication to keep them healthy, and it's a constant reminder that you're different. Just because you're staying alive physically, doesn't mean you are mentally. By disclosing my status, I want to create bridges between people living with HIV. Right now, I'm doing this interview with you. Then I'm going to finish planning for the exhibition Interminable Prescriptions for the Plague I'm curating at MoCA Taipei. I have a full-time job and work as an artist. I'm in the process of applying to do MFAs in Chicago and London. It's busy. Man, I don't know if I'm living a healthy life. I've always been a workaholic, but I sure am living a meaningful one. In the late 1970s, as the lead singer of the band The Innocents, British artist Marguerite Van Cook toured with The Clash before settling in New York, where she ran a gallery from 1983 to 1986 with her partner James Romberger. It was here that they met legendary artist David Wojnarowicz, and together, during the last years before Wojnarowicz's AIDS-related death in 1992, they started the graphic novel 7 Miles a Second. Van Cook's work, spanning the mediums of film, painting and photography, is part of many museum collections, including those of MoMA and the Whitney in New York. Van Cook is currently completing her PhD in French, is on Visual Aid's board of directors, and is in the process of establishing a project called Cure Now, which will unite artists in calling for a cure for AIDS. In 1997, I was hospitalized for 6 weeks with cryptococcal meningitis. The hallucinations were so severe the doctors assessed me for a psychiatric condition, and that's when I was diagnosed with HIV. While I was in hospital, HAART, highly active antiretroviral therapy, became the new standard of HIV care. If I had contracted it any earlier, I'd probably be dead. There were a lot of side effects at first. I lost a lot of weight. It's a double-edged sword because you're very grateful you're still alive but horrified at the way you look. I've come to embrace my appearance now. When you first get diagnosed, you lose a sense of your sexuality. You don't feel entitled to have a sexual relationship because you're carrying a disease that's typically sexually transmitted, that lodges in your psyche. Even though now that undetectable means untransmittable, it's hard for people to disclose their status because there is still so much stigma. Every time you form a close friendship with someone, you feel the knowledge that you are positive could be a burden for them, but then they could get upset if you don't say anything. You never know what the reaction is going to be. When I came out, some people pretended that they didn't know. They described me as an AIDS activist rather than an AIDS survivor. I'm very lucky that I have my partner who I've been with for about 35 years. We told our son, now 34, I had HIV around a year after my diagnosis, at which point I felt I owed him the truth. It was hard, but he's an incredible person. Every day has to be special. We have to be completely present. I get dressed up every day and I'm bolder in my fashion choices because, well, why the hell not? I don't want the disease to define me as an artist, yet I have an obligation to be an activist. As time goes on, the more comfortable I am in my own skin and the less forgiving I am of people when they are idiots. My medical costs are astronomical, around $40,000 a year, which fills me with rage when I know how cheaply these medications can be made. And I'm tired of accepting different modifications in medicine. I take 3 pills a day. I don't care if it's just one. I want a cure now. That's my next project. For the past 4 decades, the New Delhi-born, London-based, Canadian photographer has documented LGBTQ+ cultures around the world in an effort to raise awareness about issues surrounding race, migration and gay rights. Sunil Gupta's 1976 series Christopher Street captured New York's new emancipated gay community before it was decimated by the HIV/AIDS pandemic, while his more recent work From Here to Eternity gives an insight into his life after contracting HIV. Gupta's work is part of several current and upcoming exhibitions including Spectrosynthesis 2, Exposure of Tolerance, LGBTQ in Southeast Asia at the Bangkok Art and Culture Center, Thailand until March 1, 2020, and Masculinities, Liberation Through Photography at London's Barbican Gallery, February 20 to Sunday, May 17, 2020. I've been out since I was a teenager and being gay is part of my professional life. In 1995, I met a guy that I was taken with. He was only just beginning to explore his sexuality. I went to get tested and the results for HIV came back positive. We stopped having sex shortly after and he eventually left me for fear of becoming my carer. For a while I was the archetype of someone with HIV in that era. I'd never had a problem meeting people, but there was so much anxiety and a fear of rejection all of a sudden. When I told a partner I was positive, they didn't stick around for long. Finding out you have HIV is a shocking diagnosis, but I felt comforted being part of a broad social network of gay men that grew around me, partly through the Terrence Higgins Trust, who are knowledgeable about HIV and not freaked out by it. There is a real sense of camaraderie. I'm very fortunate to live in the UK. All my medication and care is covered by the National Health Service. I take a single pill that's a cocktail of drugs, but there are side effects. For example, I lost all my body fat, so I'm really sensitive to the cold. The fat tends to accumulate somewhere, in my case around my stomach, so I've joined a gym, which I never thought would happen. In India, HIV is associated with being lower class rather than a gay thing. There's a nationwide myth that HIV arrived in the South and was spread by drivers up the trucking routes where there are a lot of red light districts. In the early years, the Indian government, much like the USA, wouldn't acknowledge the pandemic. It finally responded and launched a public health program in 1992 called NACO, National AIDS Control Organization, aimed at the poor. Ironically, it forced this culture that never talked about sex to talk about sex. The challenge for me in my work has always been knowing how far to push the boundaries. I want my work to be exhibited in India as well as in the West, and so it's about finding a way to depict LGBTQ+ communities, or people living with HIV, that can exist publicly in both cultures. My partner and I have been together for 11 years and he is negative. It became difficult to live in India as a gay couple at that time because the government reinstated a colonial-era law criminalizing gay sex, that they abolished in 2009. In 2018, India's Supreme Court finally brought down the law once and for all. I've been undetectable for more than a decade, so I'm a success story of sorts. I have regular checkups to measure my viral load count. Experiencing gay liberation in the 1970s taught me that the best way to overcome shame and guilt is to speak out. I'm positive, take it or leave it. By day, 34-year-old mother of one Linnea Lawson works as a tax preparer and teaches at a tax school. Recently she has been using her free time for art and HIV advocacy, or as she puts it, operating as an artivist. Lawson is one of 130 people living with HIV and AIDS from around the world who has contributed to the collaborative photo storytelling project Through Positive Eyes. Published as a book by Aperture this month, it acts as a passionate call to action to combat stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS, by chronicling this particular moment in the pandemic, when effective treatment is available to some, but not to all. My sister told me I was HIV positive when I was 7 years old. It was 1992 and people were calling for Magic Johnson to be kicked out of the NBA for being positive, and Ryan White, a young boy who contracted the virus from a blood transfusion, had recently died. The first thing I did was go to my mother and ask her why she didn't tell me I was dying. She sat me down and said, "Before anything happens to you, it'll happen to mommy because she has it too. As long as you see me continuing to be healthy and taking care of you and your siblings, you're going to be fine." Those words helped me get through a lot. I never felt alone growing up. I went to a clinic that treated other positive kids and they organized summer camps. There was a lot of support and a strong community spirit. Social media can be a beautiful thing, and I've been reconnecting with a lot of people I met at the clinic through a Facebook group. Now I'm a mother myself to a 4-year-old girl and she is HIV negative. Making sure she didn't inherit the virus from me was easier than people might think. I'm undetectable and I continued taking the same 1 pill a day as I always do throughout the entire pregnancy. 4 hours prior to giving birth I was given AZT intravenously. I had a natural birth in a hospital and, for the first 6 weeks of her life, my daughter was administered a low dose of the drug to make sure she didn't seroconvert. The hardest part was trusting the doctors and getting over the negative side effects, including nausea, vomiting, muscle pain and loss of appetite AZT had when it was prescribed in large doses in the past. I do think the conversation has moved on from HIV/AIDS being something that only homosexuals and drug abusers get, but there's a long way to go. So many people don't know that being undetectable means untransmittable. They still think you're going to get sick and infect other people easily. This year, the American musician and poet starred as Joan of Arc in Madonna's music video for Dark Ballet, took a turn as a model, starring in ad campaigns for fashion brands including Gucci, Coach and Desigual, as well as putting the finishing touches to their sophomore album. The 33-year-old's latest offering, due spring 2020, aims, they say, to elevate rap to a classical genre and features several collaborations with some of indie music's biggest stars. At the United States Conference on AIDS in September, I gave a talk about my life before and after contracting HIV on behalf of NMAC, a group that works with Black and Latin people in America who are positive. It was one of the first times I felt like I was speaking to my people about my experience. They are me and I am them. I'm probably the most well-known person in my peer group to be openly positive, but my visibility doesn't make it any easier, nor does it make me exempt from discrimination. Still, I won't sugarcoat my story. I went through a very self-destructive period in my 20s. A lot of demons from my childhood reared their heads and I wasn't psychologically or spiritually equipped to deal with them. I didn't seek help in the form of therapy or take time to stop and reflect. Parts of my life have been so textbook for someone who has HIV, sexual abuse which in turn led to substance abuse and high-risk behaviors, something that many people don't come back from. My diagnosis was a wake-up call. I found out I was HIV positive in 2011. Blanco shared their diagnosis via Facebook in 2015 and released a song addressing it entitled You Don't Know Me the following year. After being routinely tested, I didn't have symptoms. It's nearly 2 years now since the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention acknowledged scientific research that undetectable means untransmittable, so as long as I'm taking my medication there's effectively no risk I will pass it on. Initially my mother was very hurt and shocked, but the next day she woke up and said, "You're going to get through this." I'm fortunate that I've been able to form strong relationships and work in the creative industry with like-minded individuals. I don't feel shame or want to hide my status, a survival mechanism for many people. It hasn't always been easy, but I'm thriving. I'm committed to the path of healing so I can transcend living with HIV. If you're HIV negative and reading this, I urge you to examine your beliefs and educate yourself about what it means to be positive. Don't miss out on a great friendship or relationship because of stigma. Please subscribe our YouTube channel Listen News here. If you like the video, please like, comment and share the video.